Hello, everyone. I'm Jordan Williams, the Senior Communication Specialist for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, or OLLI, at UNT. This evening, we're joined by author Kathryn Lasky for a special discussion titled, So You Think This is Fantasy? If you're interested in learning more about our lifelong learning program here at UNT, we invite you to visit our website, olli.unt.edu. We do offer a wide variety of in-person lifelong learning courses in addition to virtual events like this one. Now I'd like to introduce our two hosts for this evening. Dr. Jean Greenlaw is Regents Professor Emeritus from UNT's College of Education. She's an expert in children's literature and has been a book reviewer for decades. She currently writes the Book Talk column for the Denton Record-Chronicle. Susan Supak is a member of the OLLI at UNT Advisory Council and host of the OLLI at UNT podcast. She's conducted over 80 interviews with faculty, alumni, and OLLI members, which you can listen to on our website, olli.unt.edu/podcast. Without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to our hosts.
Welcome to OLLI's Authors Out Loud, a series of discussions with authors exploring their books, delving into the inspirations of their characters, their themes, their stories, as well as discussing the craft of writing itself. The trials, the victories, authors experience seeing their work come to completion. I'm Jean Greenlaw with my co-host, Susan Supak. Today, we're speaking with my dear friend and multi-award-winning author, Kathryn Lasky. Kathy's contributions to the literary world are as vast as they are numerous. Her talented writing can't be characterized by one label or one genre. Kathy has written over 100 books, high-quality novels, historical fiction, informational books, to the much-loved fantasy series, Guardians of Ga'Hoole, selling over 4 million copies. I envy you. In fact, Guardians of Ga'Hoole was made into a computer animated film in 2010. Your latest book, Kathy, The Secret of Glendunny, The Haunting, has received starred reviews in all the major review journals. I know, I've read them. The reviewers each reflect on the complexity of the society you have created. What in your research about beavers led you to create such a complex world?
Well, beavers are very complex animals. And I think my first knowledge of them came when I went to the Science Museum here in Boston. And there was one of those big, I forget what you call them, films. And it was made by a Japanese company. And it was all, they got underwater footage, just tons of it, of beavers building their dams, building their lodges. And it was incredible. I mean, these guys are like engineers. So that was quite a while back, almost 25 years ago. And that thought lingered in my mind, but I didn't quite know how to deal with it. And then about 10 years ago, I was reading The Guardian, a British newspaper, and I read this thing about how the first beaver had been sighted in over 500 years in England. And I just thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. Where had they gone? And I delved into it. I did a little research, and it got me back to one of my favorite periods in English history, and I've written a lot about this, which was beavers were a favorite of Henry VIII. He loved hunting them. He loved eating beaver tail. He loved their pelts, which are fabulous. And he would always hunt them when he went to his hunting lodge at New Great Foster's, it was called, where he wooed, I think it was Jane Seymour there. And so I thought, this could make a good story. What if these beavers from the 1500s decide they got to get out of Dodge? They're sick of this fat old king who's murdering them all. And so that's where that began. And then I knew I had something good because I had a very interesting historical story that was true. And then I had the fascinating science stuff about beavers. And these beavers that get out, they decide to create a secret colony way to the north in Scotland. And then other history, British history, filtered into that. So there was a richness there that was unbelievable. I mean, I just felt I hardly had to make up anything, to tell you the truth. So that's how that began.
Well, Kathy, you said that research is like a treasure hunt. And it's obvious tremendous amounts of scientific and historical research go into each of your novels, from the biolabs of Harvard to helicoptering over polar bears in Manitoba, which we're soon going to see. Through that and your skill of the craft of writing, you write such convincing scenarios involving owls that not only fly, but they forge iron into fierce battle talons, and polar bears capable of computing mathematical equations concerning the dissolution of the polar cap, the polar ice cap that threatens their habitat. And you have estimated that for every hour of writing, you have done an hour of research. That is so impressive. You've done a lot of writing. I can only imagine the research. So along that point, we have a video showing the extent that you go through, just one little piece of the extent you go through in research. And this is the polar bears. It's a great example of that. And we're going to have audio for a little of it. And then if you could just, talk about it and share your thoughts on the experience or anything else that you care to talk about. And Jordan, could you put that on for us?
Sometimes research for my writing takes me to unusual places.
Okay, here I am in Manitoba, 58 degrees north. The reason I'm here is this is the beginning of my research for a new story, a new part of Guardians of Gahul. We're going to look at the polar bears, or they're the stars of this series. And yeah, God, it's cold. We're trying to go get out on the tundra and look at, see if we can find any polar bears. The largest carnivore on Earth, and that's what we're looking for, the largest carnivore on Earth.
These polar rovers can take us safely to see bears on the Arctic tundra. But today there is a blizzard blowing, almost total whiteout. It will be hard to spot a white bear in this white world.
Gorgeous.
It's pretty cold out there. Probably it's the only clear spot they've had to take a picture.
The rovers are driven by experts who know how to find and protect the bears. The next day brings sunshine and better luck.
We spotted our first bear out there.
But most of the bears have already headed out onto the new sea ice to hunt seals. So we try a helicopter.
So the machine's going to be running when we're coming into it. So stay right behind me. Keep your head down nice and low. We're going to approach it at a 45 or a 90-degree angle.
For me, the most significant part of our trip to
It's Hudson Bay. And you see, I can't remember the name of these sort of pathways where the ice melted. But they've gone out here, the bears, because that's where they get their food. And they look for a breathing hole from us, seal, and the mother bears take the cubs out there. It's the mothers who do all the work. And they are going to teach their cubs how to fish or how to get a seal. So they find a hole and they wait till a seal comes up, and then they just yank that seal right out of the hole. Now, we did not see them doing that. I sort of had mixed feelings. Oh, there's a mom with 2 cubs. I had mixed feelings because it's a pretty bloody affair when they do that, and I'm sort of squeamish. But we did see the polar bears out there on the ice. And now I take all that information back to my study here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I try to fill it into my great files on everything I've seen. And then I also have research books all around me. And I sort of go between all these sources, my notes, my journal notes from going out there, books that I have, and I try to weave it into a tapestry or a novel. And it's exciting. I love it. I think that you do all this research and you don't really ever run out of material. The main danger is knowing too much. Now, sometimes I go to exotic places, other times less exotic places. I'll show you that now. I live about 2 blocks from the Harvard University Museum of Comparative Zoology and the biolabs. So can we see the next picture? Yeah, so that's where I went to do all of my research for the OWL books. Now, a funny thing happened. Let's get to the next picture. Yeah, see that guy there I'm standing next to? This is at the Museum of Comparative Zoology. That guy's name is Jeremiah Trimble, and he's an expert on owls. And I met him because one day when I was writing, I think I was already into the second owl book, this guy knocked on my door and he had binoculars and he said, I don't mean to alarm you, but some of our students here at Harvard think they saw an eastern screech owl in your backyard. And I just almost screeched myself. I was so excited. And sure enough, there was one there. And before you knew it, I was into owl real estate. He told me to order an owl house, actually from Texas. And that screech owl holed up there for a couple of years. But here I am in the avian part of the Museum of Comparative Zoology. And these are all barn owls that have, well, they used to go out and shoot them, but they don't allow people to do that anymore. So most of their owls come from traffic accidents. Owls fly into trucks and stuff like that. And Harvard has an arrangement with Fish and Wildlife where they can collect corpses. And so this is one of 2 drawers full of barn owls. And let's see the next one. Next slide. Okay, these are, well, I can't remember whether they're pygmy owls or northern saw-its, but they have drawers full of them. And a main character, Gylfie, in the owl series, in the Guardians of Ga'Hoole, is a pygmy owl. So they just have drawerfuls of these little guys. Let's see the next slide. Oh, well, then I started going there when I was doing the wolf books. Let's go on with the next. And so I went more into their mammals department instead of birds, hung around with all these corpse. You know, this was before it was not nice to do these things. Okay, let's see the next one. Oh yeah, I spent an unusual amount of time looking at wolf skulls, and they're what do you call it, dentition, their teeth, in other words, because they're formidable. And, they're just, they have a lot of tearing teeth, more so than any other mammal I've looked at. Okay, go on to the next one. Oh, then I went to a wolf refuge. There are no actual wolves in Massachusetts so far as we know. It's hard for me to believe because, we're kind of close to Canada. But somebody started a wolf refuge that brings injured wolves from other places. So I went out there so I could meet them up close and personal. I was fascinated by the variation in color in wolves, not their pelts. There's a lot of, but their eyes. Like this guy has these sort of amber color eyes. I thought my phone was, oh gosh. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, next slide. Or is that it? Oh, no, that's me. Well, this was sort of made for a scholastic film too. They wanted to show me doing my research, and they really wanted me to feed a wolf. And I didn't want to do this, but I did it. And what they gave me to feed them is those little cubes of cheese like they serve at not very fancy cocktail parties. And my first question was, well, don't you have a toothpick? I mean, do I have to actually use my fingers to put this in the wolf's mouth? And they said, oh, don't worry. He won't bite you. You'll get, just put it in there and then remove you. Well, I was really nervous, but I did it and I didn't get bitten. I think that's the last slide, isn't it, Jordan? Or is it?
Yes, that's the last one.
Okay, we can go back to me. Okay, and so that just shows you some of the work I do for research, but I love it. I really do. It's sometimes I have to, kind of say, you got to stop. You got to stop doing the research, go back, write the story.
It's so incredible. Anyone who has read any of your books knows that there is so much detail in it. Not only the animals, but even the geography that you write about. I remember in the owl books, you were quite detailed about the geography and everything. And it's just astounding. And probably what is just so incredibly impressive to me is how you take all these facts that I know you work so hard to gather, and you make them into these characters. You create these believable scenarios. So would you do us a favor? Would you read something? You've written so much. This is a tough thing to ask because you got so much, but if you could just read something that illustrates your research in your books.
Well, I'm going to read something from the first Guardians of Ga'Hoole book because there's two kind of interesting things. Of course, I studied so much about feathers, and they had so much at the Harvard Museum and the biolabs. The feathers were fascinating to me. And what I sometimes do is I make up a word for certain, some owls have fringe feathers, which softens the noise of their flight. That's why they're called such silent flyers, because they have these delicate little, like almost silky feathers on the edges of their wings that just hush the flight. So I decided to make up a name for those, and I called them plummels. And I don't know why. I just thought that's a nice word, plummels. So here's just a paragraph about those plummels. Soren, he's the lead character, ran his beak lightly through the plummels that hovered like a fine mist over his flight feathers. He remembered his mother saying how one must preen their plummels every day, for indeed plummels were unique to owls. Of all birds, only owls, and only certain owls at that, had plummels. Elf owls did not have these fine feathers that fringed the leading edges of wings. It was these feathers that allowed brown owls like Soren to fly almost in complete silence. Plummels, his mother had said, are every bit as important as a sharp beak or sharp talons. These words were, of course, directed mostly to Clud. Clud's plummels had just begun to sprout shortly before Soren had been snatched. Clud was his evil older brother. But all Clud cared about was his beak and talons. And then, so Soren's best friend, who's not actually a pygmy owl, Gylfi is an elf owl, she doesn't have any. Little owls don't have them. And she's kind of envious. So that's one thing I've got in my research about what I call plummels. Then the best thing I found in my research, I didn't find this at any museum, or I read something about how owls often have blind snakes that live in the hollow with them. And the snakes are the housekeepers. They eat any vermin, they keep the place all nice and neat. Well, I just practically went into hysterics when I found out this fact, because I just thought, oh my God, this can be like upstairs, downstairs, or Downton Abbey. I can have a whole, staff. And yeah, I'm picturing them with little hats and aprons and stuff like that. Well, their nestmate, blind snake, is a female snake that they call Mrs. Plithifer. And she keeps the kids in line, all that. There was a series, this is in the very first chapter of the book. There was a series of soft, short hisses from Mrs. Plithifer. Difficult one, that one. My, glad your mom's not here to see this eglantine. She's referring to the older brother who's a real jerk. Mrs. Plithifer called out suddenly, even though she was blind. She seemed to know exactly what the young owlets were doing at any given moment. Now she heard the crunch of a nest bug in Eglantine's beak. That's Soren's younger sister. Put that nest bug down. Owls do not eat nest bugs. That's what house snakes do. If you keep it up, you'll grow fat and squishy and won't be prepared for your first meat ceremony. And then no first fur. And then no first bones. And then no, well, you know what. Now your mom is just out looking for a nice chubby vole with soft fur for Soren's first fur ceremony. And she might even find a nice wiggly little centipede for you, but lay off the bugs. So, she's nursemaid, nanny, housekeeper. And I would have never known that if I hadn't read. It was actually an academic article on owls and how, and I don't know if there are other species of birds who keep nestmates, but the nestmates become a big part of this whole saga of the owls. So
even her name is great, Mrs. Plithifer. I mean, she just fits her so well.
Yeah, she was fun to write about.
Well, Kathy, you've shared with us quite a few levels of research that you do. In fact, I understand that when you were working on the wolves book, you even started playing a video game about wolves.
I was terrible at it. I was terrible. I tried to play it. My kids were good at it. And I don't know whether I got that much out of it, but it was a territory thing. It's like wolves trying to establish their territory and have battles and hunts and all of that kind of stuff. I can't remember it that well because I just hate video games. But it didn't cost that much, so I thought I'd invest in it. And I was very interested in really what gets me about wolves is the hierarchy. And they didn't do enough of that in the game for my taste. But there's an alpha female and an alpha male. And then there's this sort of hierarchy, and then they have all these postures that they do. When they're approaching the alpha male, they crawl up on their belly. I mean, it's sort of like, I guess, having an audience with the Queen of England or something. So I learned a little bit about that, but I learned more from just reading and not a game. But my kids helped me with it a little bit. Yeah.
You mentioned, you just briefly went over something a minute ago that I'm very interested in, because I love to do research. Research is just the most fun thing for me. But you mentioned that sometimes it's just time to stop with the research and write. What tells you that? What motivates you to say, okay, I've got enough. I'm now going to put all this into a book form?
I think I start actually at some point, get a little distant from the storyline and the characters. And that's what makes me think, you got to stop. You got to get back to your friends in the book, the characters. Kids don't need to know about, the blood levels of whatever in a polar bear or what like that, all this really technical stuff. They don't need to know about that. And I got to get back to the characters. That's what makes me stop. And I start to lose the storyline.
So you decide on the characters while you're doing the research. It isn't, you've created the characters.
Oh, yeah. The research is an ongoing thing. I do a lot in the beginning before I start writing the book, but it keeps going on throughout the whole book because I keep having to double check things. I make notes, but I'm thinking, well, how many, I don't know, talons does a owl have? I always would forget that. They actually have, see, I forgot it again. I think they have 5. And one of them is flippable. So I'm always going back to double check. Yeah.
We've spoken of the research you do for your books. I'm also interested in what research you do that leads you to a topic that you're going to write a book about. For example, this past year, you've published 3 very different books. She Caught the Light, a picture book biography of Williamina Fleming, which I love. Faceless, set in World War II, which has some, even though it is factual in many ways, it has a tad of fantasy in it. And then The Secret of Glendunny, an animal fantasy. They are totally different. How do you pick a topic? How do you keep in your mind? I know all 3 came out in one year, but you probably wrote them one at a time.
Oh,
wait.
Yeah, I did. Well, I think I wrote them one at a time, but I've written 2 books at once. Oh, it's good. I think I wrote She Caught the Light while I was starting Faceless. She Caught the Light, because I read a snippet of something in the newspaper about Wilhelmina Fleming, and again, the Harvard Observatory is, well, a little farther away than the Museum of Comparative Zoology, but like, say, a 12-minute walk from my house. And I thought, this is really interesting that this lady, figured out the spectra of the star, and they didn't have color photography back then. And then I find out that she was one of 12, but she was the first of something they called the human computer, which were, I think, 12 women who did all the calculations for the Harvard astronomers. They were paid 25 cents an hour, and the astronomers were paid $1.25 an hour. And they had to do this. First of all, they wouldn't allow the women to look through the telescope because, it was cold. They had to go outside, or the planet where they have it is the roof's off. They were afraid they'd catch cold. And it wasn't ladylike, all that rot. So, and then they had to figure out this spectra. It was before color photography. So they weren't seeing the elements in their colors. They had to do it by, well, you have to read the book. I can't take time to explain it, but by looking at the cluster of these little fine lines that were just about as thin or thinner than a hair. So I knew I wanted to write something about the human computer, these women, but I didn't want to tackle them all in one book. And for some reason, Wilhelmina appealed to me the most. She had the hardest, most challenging life. And so I remembered that we used to have a graduate student who was a babysitter for us, and her fiance had been a grad student at Harvard. This is way back when. And he was an astronomer, a astrophysicist. And he's actually now the head of the department at Drexel University. So I thought, well, I could educate myself by calling up Stacy's husband. And so I did. I called Stacy. She actually babysat for our son on the night our daughter was born. And her husband, Steve McMillan at Drexel. So he gave me a quick, and I credit him in the book, he gave me a quick short course in astronomy and spectra and all of that. And so that's how that book came about. But it was at the same time I was writing something else that was totally different, Faceless, which was a historical fiction novel. And I've written 4 on World War II. I'm endlessly fascinated by World War II. So now I forget what your question was.
What leads you to write? And you mentioned, for example, you read a clipping about Wilhelmina. So yeah. What led you to write the Faceless book, and then what led you to write the Glendunny book?
Oh, well, the Faceless book.
What sparks? What is the spark, I guess, is what I'm asking.
The spark. Well, there's always a spark with World War II. I always come up with something. And I love spy books. I just read a lot, not just spy novels. I love this guy, Ben McIntyre, who is an expert on spies. So he writes nonfiction. And so I wanted to write, I hadn't really written a book, a World War II book that had a major spy thread in it. And then when I was doing all my research for my Dear America book about Elizabeth the First, and also the novels about Tangled in Time, which is during her reign, I was very interested in the spy stuff. In the research I found, oh gosh, what's his name? Walsingham or something was Henry VIII's major spy. And I remembered I'd read something about how he was a spy master, but he had written someplace about a guy who had helped him escape when he had been imprisoned by the French. And he said he couldn't remember his name. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. He couldn't remember this guy's name. He couldn't remember his face. That was it. He couldn't remember his face. And around the same time, I'd read this wonderful book called Bone Gap. That was a YA book. And it was about a kid who had this condition called, and I can never pronounce it, prosophagia, which is being face blind. And the main character in the book was face blind. And I thought, what if you turn that around? What if there was kind of a race of people who had faces that nobody could remember? Wouldn't they make interesting spies? So then I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And so I can read you so you can get my, it's the preface of this book. I write this in, and I've of course made up the name of the spy master here, but it's from the time of Henry VIII. Within 5 years, I, with my Majesty's blessing, had created a new secret agency, the most adept in the world of intelligence and counterintelligence. Thus far, the Rasas, as in tabula rasa, in reference to their completely forgettable, nearly blank faces, have endured. We, of course, refer to the agency now only as the company. God willing, and the empire be blessed, we shall endure for centuries to come. Our greatest triumph was just a few days ago, July 29th, 1588, the defeat of the Spanish Armada. And I put from the 1588 diary of William Morfett, spy master to Henry VIII. So I just took that idea. I made that part up. And then I transferred it to World War II. So the lead in this book is a little girl who is British, but she and her whole family are part of this tabula rasa group of spies. And they go to Germany during World War II. Well, her father's been there for a while and he works in the Reich garage. And then she goes there, and she's just like a 13, 14-year-old girl, but she's an extremely good student. They're all very brilliant, these kids, and they can speak languages fluently. And she distinguishes herself just in, grade school to the point where she wins this prize, which is she can work in the Führer's home, or, where he lived in Berlin, and be part of the inner staff over the summer. So that's how that book, and to write that and the Wilhelmina book at the same time was good. They were so different.
Good.
Yeah.
It's just interesting how little things can, for an author, hit your imagination and turn into a book.
Yeah. That was it.
I am just so impressed by all the information you have in your head. That's amazing. You're like, if I had to be trapped on a plane or a desert island somewhere, Kathryn, I would like to be with you, because you've just got so much. It's so cool. And what you do with it, I'm so impressed. I'm not wishing that on us, but still, what great company you are. I'm going to go a little bit aside from research for a minute, because in an earlier interview that you gave, I heard you talk about the importance of shareable moments in novels. And I guess at the time they were primarily talking about battle, but you were talking about how a shareable moment is where humanity reinserts itself into the indecencies of trauma and battle and all other bad situations. And, to me, I think about when you do that in your books, and when I read that in other books, those are the moments when I'm reading that make me care. They make me care about what happens to the characters, and they make the characters real for me. And I know I've told you this before, but I truly put you in the company of the greats, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, my two of my favorites, who write about the battles between good and evil and the importance of the friendship in those struggles. And you certainly do that. And more to my point, I'm going to read an excerpt from a letter you received just a few days ago. And I think it's so incredible. It is just so amazing. This, to the audience, this is a letter that Kathy received from one of her readers, and I'll read some excerpts of it. Dear Kathryn Lasky, I want to thank you for saving my life. I have dyslexia and ADHD, so reading was not something I really wanted to do growing up. My mom read to me before bedtime. In third grade, she started reading me the Guardians of Ga'Hoole series. After my mom left, I'd stay up and try to make sense of the words by the light of my nightlight. Those books taught me how to read and how to love reading. In fourth grade, I got verbally bullied a lot. I was passively suicidal. It was your books that kept me going. I would always have one of your books with me, so I had somewhere safe to escape to. I memorized all of the poems, every song, and every scrap of legend. You gave me the gift of literature. I felt safe and not alone, because you're never alone when you have a book. I honestly cannot tell you if I'd still be alive if it wasn't for the order of the nightly owls from the kingdom called Ga'Hoole, who would rise each night into the blackness and perform noble deeds, spoke no words but true ones, whose purpose was to right all wrongs, make strong the weak, mend the broken, vanquish the proud, and make powerless those who abuse the frail. Wow. I'm sure this letter is just one of many of the people whose lives you've touched around the world. And it must be so gratifying for you to hear something like this.
Yeah. That letter, I have to say, it really knocked my socks off. I just got it a few days ago, and I just kept thinking, this is, I guess, why I do this, and I'm very lucky that I get some feedback. Nothing like this ever before, but still.
But I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who haven't written you that have had the same experience. And I mean, we're talking about your books around the world. I mean, they're published in all kinds of languages. So I can just only imagine the effect that you've had on people. And that's why I put you up there with the greats. I think that's really incredible.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
Kathy, along with your wonderful legends, it's obvious that you love history. And what I love is that many of your main characters in historical fiction are women. They're strong girls or strong women. Do you ever have to change the historical facts to fit your storyline? Do you feel there's an ethic in writing historical fiction that you can or can't change history? What do you think about that?
I really stick to the facts. I get very nervous. I would not change history. I mean, there are people who write things it's called alternative history, like say if Germany won World War II or something like that. But that, first of all, just doesn't appeal to me as a writer or a reader that much. So I really stick exactly to the facts. I'm very careful about dates. I have, I don't know where that book is now, but I had something, I think not an eternal calendar, perpetual calendar. I can go back and look, this is fascinating, and see if Christmas was on a Monday or a Tuesday 400 years ago or something like that. It's a perpetual calendar. So I really try to stick to it. I think a really interesting question, though, about sort of that is still kind of an ethics question, is that, so I'm restating your question a little bit. What can historical fiction bring to the table? Would I be allowed to sit beside a noted historian? And I think if done responsibly, I could, because historical fiction doesn't say believe this. It says consider this. And that's the difference between me and a person who writes history. I'm trying to think. great writer, well, like the guy who wrote the Lyndon Johnson books. He's fabulous. I can't think of his. Oh, Caro. Yeah, Robert Caro. He's fabulous. I'm not going to be able to do that sort of thing. But I think I could, have a view on Lyndon Johnson. Not that I want to write a book about him now, that where I could ask people to consider him in another way or something. I'm offering a version of the past. It's not alternative facts, but nevertheless, I tend to think of it as real history in a way, historical fiction. That's not a bad word if you really are diligent about and responsible about writing.
Do you have to be as diligent in your study of a particular period in history and the people of the time as you are in the biology of the owl?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the prejudices that they had back then, not that we're not any better now, but, at least we don't hang bells around lepers' necks or something like that. When I was writing the Royal Diary on Queen Elizabeth, I had this marvelous editor. She died several years ago. And her name is Anne Wright. And so I had a bear baiting scene because that was a popular sport or entertainment during the Elizabethan age, where they'd bring these bears out and they'd set dogs on the bears and then see if the bears could kill the dogs and all of that. And so I wrote that whole scene and I thought, okay. And then I wrote another gory scene where Elizabeth, when her mother had her head chopped off, Elizabeth was just 3 years old. But now she's like 11 years old and she decides she wants to go back and visit, something. I'm sorry, but it's one of these dumb, you might have lost me, sorry.
No, you're there. You're here.
Okay, good. So one of these, she wanted to go back, go to the Tower of London. I mean, people went there for other reasons than to be imprisoned and all of that. But she wanted to see the yard where her mother was executed and maybe speak to one of the guards. And so I have this whole scene where she goes and they describe in detail, how they put her head down on the thing and the blade and how they tied up her hair. Oh, really detail in the blood, all that. It's really good. So then I get the manuscript back from my editor, Anne Wright, and she said to me, okay, there's this one scene you have to cut. And I said, I know, it's that scene at the Tower of London, right? She said, oh no, that's fine. It's the bear baiting scene. We have to cut it. We'll have PETA all over us if we show that. So sometimes it really surprises you of what is allowed, and but I try to stick very close. So I had done all this research about beheadings, and Henry VIII had imported a French swordsman because he felt they did it better. I don't know what that means exactly. You have to hack away at her neck or something. But
this is kind of an aside, but do you get many changes from your editor? Like, how do you feel about that when you are?
I get lots of changes. I mean, I don't know any writer who doesn't, and I always feel they are really good because, to tell you the truth, editors know the market, they know the audience better than I do. So, so I don't feel bad at all about that.
Have you ever, though, said, no, this is the way it has to be?
Sensitivity.
Yes, I will tell you, with Faceless, this is a new thing in the world of children's books, and they're called sensitivity readers. So I had done Faceless. They were just about to send out the advanced reading copies when I get a call from my agent, and they said they're holding this up because they've decided they have to have a board of sensitivity readers going through it. And I was pretty appalled. I said, well, I don't see how anybody could object to anything I've said. You know, I've done my research. And my editor was furious too. But they submitted this 3-page letter of things they felt that I had to change or do again because I might offend somebody, blah, blah, blah. They betrayed such an ignorance that it was appalling. I rejected the first thing was they wanted to change my main character, the little spy. They said, you should make her Jewish. I said, no, I shouldn't. You know, she's, first of all, she's faceless. That's the whole thing. She comes from this race of people that nobody can remember their faces. Her religion isn't part of it. She's a spy. So I wouldn't do that. But they said other things that were so stupid. She befriends a little Jewish boy, and he tells her how he got left behind, sort of left behind on purpose when his parents were taken away on the trains to the Auschwitz and wherever, that his father shoved some money into his pocket, and he said, you go. I want you to live. And he said, and the first place you go is go to a butcher and buy a pork sausage. And the sensitivity reader, and he says, you know, the butcher over on whatever street that's across from the flower shop. And the sensitivity reader said, an Orthodox Jewish boy wouldn't know where a butcher shop, a non-kosher butcher shop was. And I thought, well, didn't you read it? His father told him where it was. I mean, that was one thing. Another thing was the art. So in Hitler's bunker, which was a vast, expensive thing, underground, they stored a lot of the paintings, great paintings, that Goering, for the most part, had collected. And they were stored in these underground tunnels. And she's walking through, and I'd done so much research on this. I knew exactly the painting I wanted her to see. I think it was it a Monet or a Degas? I can't remember now. And so I mentioned that she saw this when she was there working for the Reich. And they said they would have never collected these paintings because they would have considered them degraded art or something, you know. I said, haven't you read about Goering? Haven't you read about the whole recovery of art that was stolen from Jews and others? Don't you know that the Lauders of the Lauder brothers got the Klimt? I just could not believe they were so ignorant. And then there was another thing. The third thing that I recall was when she would go to the Berghof, which was his Hitler's sort of vacation place in the Southern Alps, I guess it was. He had a big thing there. All the big Nazis had homes there, like Goering and those people. And he would go with his mistress, Eva Braun. And they said, and there's a scene where he's giving a kind of like a garden party thing. And Eva Braun's there. And this little girl's serving hors d'oeuvres to the top Nazis, and, carrying a little tray around. And they said, this sensitivity reader said he was never seen in public with Eva Braun. So I sent her the title of the book that I'd gotten out of the library that had photographs of Eva Braun in her little dirndl with a glass of champagne or whatever. I said, no, she might not have gone on a parade with him, but at home, when he was entertaining, she was there. Here's one picture that I found. So I just, sensitivity readers just drive me nuts.
Well, on that point, I'm going to have to say, unfortunately, we've run out of time and won't be able to include questions from our audience. I hope they'll forgive us because we've covered so many things. But Kathy, I also want to tell you that on this April 1st, the Grand Aquarius gifted me with his trappings of royalty. He gave me his crown.
Oh, I know.
And he gave me his royal scepter. So those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, you must read The Secret of Glendunny and find out what the crown, and this is the crown, it is the real one, and the royal scepter have to do with The Secret of Glendunny.
Would you please have those two little grandchildren of yours take a picture of you?
Okay, I shall. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so very much for joining us. But I do want to tell you that our next Authors Out Loud series will be in the fall. It's going to be on October 5th at 5:30, the same time. And we will host a panel of 3 award-winning mystery writers. First is Kathryn Hall-Page, writer of the Faith Fairchild series, and a 3-time Agatha Award winner. In fact, she's the only author to be nominated for all 4 categories in the Agatha Award. The second author will be the New York Times bestselling author Bill Martin, who is author of 12 novels and winner of the prestigious New England Book Award and the Robert B. Parker Award. For those of you who read mysteries, you know who Robert B. Parker is, and from the Mystery Writers of America. And our third author will be Kathryn Lasky, who is going to bring out an adult mystery this fall. And it will be in the genre of the amateur sleuth. And guess who the amateur sleuth is? Georgia O'Keeffe. So you can imagine the research she has done to bring Georgia O'Keeffe alive for us. So I hope you all will attend in the fall with us. And this has been a wonderful session. Kathy, you are just the best. And
Thank
Susan,
you.
thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Jordan.
Yes.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone. I hope everybody has a great evening.
Thank you.